So the Wild Hunt, it is obviously a pretty big deal in The Witcher. It is literally called Witcher 3, the Wild Hunt. There are these elves abducting people, they're trying to steal Ciri, but it is also a super interesting European folklore phenomenon. It is mainly thought to be a Germanic myth, but it can also be seen in Slavic countries, in Celtic mythology, in Scandinavia, and all sorts of Central and Western European countries. They are generally associated with Odin, these riders, but what is really interesting is that the Christian monks have really demonized them, so they turn into these evil spectres, these terrible dark figures that when people saw in the skies, it was a pretty bad omen. It was something you never wanted to see. It signified plague, it signified war, and everything else. So who really are the Wild Hunt? How did The Witcher 3 interpret them, and what are they in the European mythologies? What are all the regional differences? To say that the Wild Hunt is shrouded in mystery is a massive understatement. In pretty much all the different stories, there are always these mysterious horsemen. That is the common theme. Mysterious horsemen coming in from the sky, but they always have different names, different leaders, different functions, and things they do. This is mainly thought to be a Germanic myth because it was written most significant in the 19th century by one of the Grimm brothers. But even though it is considered a Germanic myth, it is also found in Slavic countries, in Celtic mythology, and in most of Central and Western Europe. Even in the Germanic variations, so in Germany and in Scandinavia, there are still various differences, there are various functions, the name is completely different. So let us examine what this is, how it works in The Witcher, and what is all the difference between the Germanic, the Scandinavian, and all the Slavic mythology. To say that the Wild Hunt is a pretty big deal in The Witcher is really an understatement. I mean, it is literally called the Wild Hunt Witcher, but it is actually quite similar to European mythology when you look at it, not just in the looks, but also in the functions. In The Witcher 3, they're known as these wraiths of Morhawk, people that are abducting everyone, and in Skellige, people actually believe quite close to the Scandinavian myth into what it is, because in Skellige, they also believe in Ragnarok, the end times. Now, in the game, they are capturing people, they're stealing everyone, and we also learned that they're trying to steal Ciri because of her elder blood. We realize that there are these folk myths, these fairy tales that kind of exist. We start uncovering them little by little, and then eventually we realize that they aren't these monsters, they aren't really that invincible, that they're just elves with masks and they just look dark. But let us look at how this Wild Hunt evolved, what it actually is in European mythology, and what are all the differences. The origins are quite unclear on how they started. It is mainly thought to be a Germanic myth because this is where most written sources come from. Although the pre-Christian one is not 100% supported, it is kind of speculation. The reason is because most of the actual writings, all of them come from Christian times, from the 11th century and so on, and it is thought that the Christians wrote about this so that they can get people to stop believing in Odin and all these things, and they decided to demonize them. Originally, the Wild Hunt had a more benevolent role. These were these riders, generally Odin and his Einherjar, so these heroes from Valhalla that were riding into battle, and when you saw these guys, this was a good omen, this was something good was happening, welfare, you would give them gifts, you wanted to see this, but eventually, over time, through Christian writing, they became these terrible, disgusting, twisted beings. Odin was twisted and cursed, and these were just demons abducting people. If you saw this in the sky, it was a terrible omen. This meant that plague was coming, war was coming, destruction was coming, and you really didn't want to see the Wild Hunt. Now that is the general gist of it, but based on the regional differences, this storyline is just all the way completely different. The most popular one is the Germanic version, and it generally splits into the stories from around the area of Germany and Scandinavia. In the German version, these are undead warriors of Odin or Woden, and they're very demon-like in the Christian view, as you would expect, and usually they are accompanied by dogs, these animals, but most often werewolves that are stealing for some reason. In the Scandinavian version, it is generally a little bit different. It isn't even called the Wild Hunt, it is called the Odin's Heart or the Asgaard Ride, and you usually wouldn't even see them. You would hear the dogs barking, you would hear the hunt coming, and if you heard the dogs barking, you know something was happening and Odin was here. In some parts of Sweden, for example, they signified weather changing. In other parts, it signified war, plague, or just terrible things happening. And interestingly enough, if houses were built on roads that were previously where Odin was walking, you would expect the houses to be burned and everything would be destroyed where Odin would go. Now, in the Slavic mythology, this is a little bit different, but we've been hearing variations in France, Italy, and various parts of Europe where the leader was some of the Germanic chieftains of the medieval times that attacked Rome. And in Slavic mythology, usually this is mainly Central Slavic countries, Central European, Western Slavic countries, but even goes as far as Belarus. In Poland, it is known as the Dziki Gon or the Dziki Lov. Dziki is generally like Diki, which usually means wild in a lot of Slavic languages, and lov generally means hunt. The Czech version is known as the Divoky Hon, and it is a little bit different. Usually these undead warriors would arise around Christmas time, and it was even connected with a forest demon. In the Slovenian version, it is known as the Divja Jaga, and usually the leader of this hunt would be Yarilo, one of the Slavic gods, usually known as the son of Perun, but you could also see some feminine figures leading the hunt as well, although the entire storyline isn't completely clear. A really interesting implication is the philosophical side of this wild hunt. It is like this blurred line between life and death. So you would have these dead people riding in the night and they would cross into the world of the living. So this was just kind of like this implication that the dead and the living were connected. Another really interesting fact is that Santa Claus was possibly influenced by this. I mean, he has a beard, he's riding in the night, he's very similar to Odin. So this would be like a really interesting return of these sinister, dark, plague warrior riders coming, and they would turn into Santa Claus. They would be coming around the same time, but instead he would be bringing presents. Overall though, a lot of this myth was lost to time, but it was super influential in a lot of fantasy. As I said, in Lord of the Rings, you might have seen them. This was Nazgul. It is said that they were heavily influenced by them. Obviously, the Wild Hunt. This is also in The Witcher. And despite all the various regional differences and everything, we can't really find that many sources because most of the myths are actually from the 19th century. We have some really scant Christian sources from that time. However, what is also super interesting to see is that you can see this transition from these heroes of the regular people, these gods, and they would be turned just completely different into these evil, disgusting demons, which was really just a way for Christians to demonize pagan gods and folk heroes so that they would split them off from their native religion. Thank you for watching. If you guys want to see more videos or if you want to see the Slavic myths in The Witcher 3, you can check out the previous video, subscribe to the channel, and see you next time.